Hello, this is the answer key for the second quiz on biochemistry, which covers lipids, nucleic acids, and metabolism. Though if you think of it, kapag diniscuss ang metabolism, it's like you discussed all of the four biomolecules again. So, in a way, studying metabolism is not really just limited to the two biomolecules that were covered in the scope for this one. Though the first, 40 questions are really more of the lipids and the nucleic acids. The first 20, I believe, sa lipids, katulad nung unang tanong, which of the following is the main lipid found in adipose? And the answer for that would be the triglycerides, of course, because whenever you hear of the word, for example, of fat or oil, those are primarily triglycerides. In fact, I'm not the one in charge of your pharmacognosy, right? Pero sa PICOG, nililinaw namin usually doon that fat is something more of related to animals, but is definitely something na mas solid in substance. And oil is something a little more of plant-based, not always, but more of often than not, plants galing siya. And liquids yun. But their composition is primarily tags or triglycerides. Whereas these have other purposes. Actually, waxes are also storage lipids, but more of in plants, di tulad sa ating mga animals na triglycerides. Phosphines do not have any storage function. So more of specifics like say phospholipids, they are membrane lipids. Sphingolipids are also membrane pero more of concentrated on the nervous system. Another thing that we need to remember is that I told you to please memorize the trivial names of the fatty acids. Yes, that includes both saturated and unsaturated. So yung 16-0 na to, the zero actually tells us or reminds us of the delta notation that 16 is 16 carbons and 0 is 0 double bond. So technically, ito ay isang saturated fatty acid because you don't have a single carbon-carbon double bond. But the 16 carbon one is palmitic acid, right? Yung stearic at arachidic, 18 at 20 carbons respectively. Palmitic naman ang 16. Though actually, it will be easy to kind of, hear from the wording that it's saturated kasi you have that I sound. And that has no logic, right? Wala talagang, I don't think that is intentional, or maybe it is, but it's not very, parang napaka-discrete lang, no, or low-key lang. Whereas yung mga unsaturated like arachidonic has more of that O sound in the pronunciation. Arachidonic is like arachidic pero meron siyang 4 double bonds. Okay? Which also matters, diba, when you start to study or review the unsaturated fatty acids kasi if you know yung delta numbers niya, you should know that you can get the omega number from subtracting the 20 and the 14, right? The carbon number and the last double bond locate. But anyway, let's move to the next question. When we do compare yung saturated at unsaturated, we make it clear that there are things that clearly one wins over the other. Okay? But saturated fatty acids are less in what? All I know is that when we were discussing itong dalawang ito, I made it really clear. I think it's also in the table, diba? That as far as melting and boiling points are concerned, saturated wins because of the greater stacking, which actually, if you think about the word stacking, that just means intermolecular forces. So A and B is kind of like a package deal na the reason exactly why saturated fatty acids have a higher melting is because they have better intermolecular forces. To be specific, yung van der Waals or London dispersion from the stacking that they do. And unsaturated fatty acids have lesser melting point. exactly because of the double bond. Na dito, I'm going to, get back a little bit of our org-chem stock knowledge. Dapat, that when you say a double bond, that means you have one pi bond. So that means that unsaturated fatty acids have more pi bonds and saturated fatty acids have less. This is the answer. In fact, pwede nga tanongin yan eh. Like, we know already that saturated fatty acids have that pi bond, that second bond, that in the double bond. But what configuration do we normally have this? Kasi pwede kang cis or trans. And the answer to that would be cis, right? Exactly the reason why the stacking of unsaturated ones are lower. Now, that idea that I've been going around in the last 2 minutes or 3 minutes is going to be used in number 4 kasi we now are being asked for the lowest melting point. I look at the choices and luckily I see that all are saturated fatty acids, well, methic, arachidic, lauric, stearic. So they all wala silang O. And dito napapasok yung pag-memorize nyo ng carbons, right? Because we know that the higher the carbons, the higher the melting point. Conversely, the lowest carbons have the least melting point. So we're looking for lowest carbons, which is 12, right? That makes lauric the one here in the list with the lowest. Pag tinanong naman highest, what would be the answer? Arachidic na because it has the most carbons naman in the choices. Okay? 5, which are unsaturated fatty acids? And again, this one has the pronunciation or that O, helping us out. Arachidonic is one, linoleic is one, and these ones don't really have that sound to it, diba? So 1 and 4 ang unsaturated. But again, let me remind everyone, no? Nag-aaral ka na nga lang ng basics ng lipids, sagarin mo na. Memorize again. For example, that capric has 10 carbons na walang double bond. Tapos, palmitic has 16 carbons na walang double bond. Arachidonic, I wrote that already earlier. Pero linoleic is 18,2 delta 9, 12. Which is not the same as linolenic, ha? Kasi linolenic has 3 double bonds instead of just 2. 6, which of these hormones come from cholesterol? And remember, our steroid hormones usually have the ster in it, like testosterone or progesterone. In the choices, however, I intentionally avoided those words para hindi masyadong obvious. Pero, like, come on. If you know that testosterone is a sex hormone, progesterone is a sex hormone, that means that in general, sex hormones are steroid. Estrogens are part of that, right? Therefore, estradiol is also a steroidal hormone. Whereas yung growth hormone, just, a little bit of, borrowing from your pharmacology lessons, you should know that it's one of our pituitary hormones. And all pituitary hormones are peptides. Insulin is a peptide. That's exactly why I have mentioned it with other proteins like keratin in our hair and collagen of our skin when I was covering proteins, right? Thyroxine is also a peptide. And that's why may table tayo sa last parts ng handout ko, right? Showing you the different derivatives or popular molecules that can be created from amino acids. Yung thyroxine can come from tyrosine. So these three are more of created by amino acids instead. Actually, when you study hormones, dalawang category lang naman yun in general. The hormones that are steroidal, which are, yung mga sex and adrenal hormones, and everything else basically are peptide or amino acid derived. Anyway, going back to lipids naman, we now have phospholipids, but sometimes we have specific trivial names, which I know I have indicated in my review material, right? So specifically, phosphatidyl ethanolamine is the cephalin. Okay? Yung lecithin naman, phosphatidyl choline naman yan, diba? Yan. Whereas sphingomyelin and ceramide, that even belongs to a different category. Ano na siya, sphingolipids na. which has a table of its own. Like for example, sphingomyelin also has phosphate and choline in its composition, and ceramides basically have nothing, no, except just a single fatty acid. So walang head group to. Again, let me remind you that everything I am writing right now or saying are indicated, tabulated pa nga in our review handout. Okay? Now, sphingolipids, if you are listening to what I'm blabbering about earlier, has relationship with the brain, right? Like cerebroside, sphingomyelin, nervous system parts. So therefore, the best answer here is nervous tissue. Okay? I think there's not a lot to expound on this anymore. No? 9. This one also, I hope this one is going to be simple. That if you have excessive cholesterol to the liver, which is a good thing because if you allow the cholesterol to stay in the blood, that can cause heart disease. Ito yung type ng lipid na pinipigilan yan, that stops it because you hide it to the liver before everything goes worse. Eh di good cholesterol ang tawag dyan. There's only one good cholesterol, quote unquote, that you should know of, and that is HDL. Whereas yung LDL, no, actually VLDL is kind of similar in that in this aspect, that they do the opposite, which is to get the excess lipids from the liver and throw it down to the blood, which can actually increase the risk of heart disease. Kaya nga, diba, bad cholesterol naman, especially ang LDL. And that is the focus sometimes when you go far as discussing antihyperlipidemics in your pharmacology, like niacin increasing HDL, diba? Or LDL being primarily made of cholesterol. That is why statins, which prevent cholesterol synthesis, are perfect for reducing LDL. Stuff like that is based on your fundamental understanding of these lipoproteins. 10. Which of the following is required in proper maintenance of the bone? Well, ito actually ang ating adik, diba? And for bone, we have the calciferol, the calcium-regulating hormone, vitamin D, which by the way, I already said its name, so that's boy. Yung menadayon, yung mga may men sa pangalan, is vitamin K. Tocopherol is E, and the retinoids are E, right? Next. We go naman to this example. We go back to being a fatty acid. So I threw this question kasi gusto ko i-assess kung talaga bang alam niyo yung pinagsasabi nating delta or omega. Kasi sometimes it's easy to just say, yeah, I remember what a saturated or an unsaturated fatty acid is, or yeah, I know what those delta numbers mean. Pero like, sige nga, show me. Okay? Or prove to yourself. Okay? So this is an example of that, where I have here, if you count all of that, 18 naman yan, no contest. But how many double bonds do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't count the CO, diba? Yung COOH, that's not included in the unsaturations. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So dapat yung first delta number mo is 6, which should lead you to something like 6, 9, 12, 15. And the only part here where I see those numbers is letter dog. But how about the omega? Diba, the omega, something like the last letter of the Greek alphabet, is the carbon opposite to the beginning kasi ito yung 1, right? Eh di ito yung last, whatever number that is, in this case, number 18. But here, we count this as omega 1, omega 2, omega 3, and you stop there, right? So that would mean it's omega 3. And then I said that earlier, right? That all you gotta do sometimes is to subtract yung number na to at yung number na to. So 18 minus 15 should also lead you to the answer 3. Okay? Next. I also said this earlier. So again, sometimes I have the habit of not remembering what other questions I made, but it works out in the end. I said this already. It is the cis double bond which normally happens. Saka after all, if you think about it or if you reflect on it, diba, when you say trans double bonds or the trans fats, Those are unnatural and sometimes caused by creating processed food, wherein the hydrogenation process becomes bad or not perfect. And trans fats have a lot of risk for heart disease, cardiovascular risk. Okay. Actually, if you go further, there's something like the discovery. Matagal na nitong ang alam that some meat like beef have very, 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 very small amounts of trans fats na natural. But I think that info is too tiny or minute to kind of be mentioned in popular test question. Like, pag binato tong test question to, just assume that 99.9% of the time, yung double bonds of fatty acid natin ay unsaturated. So, I mean, unsaturation pala is cis. So, you know, don't think of trans as a natural. I mean, it happens, but it's too insignificant to be asked, I believe. 14. Which of the following is omega 3? So, this is one of the things I told you that remembering the omega numbers also a good thing to be assured of. But here I have a little context to make this question something more of dapat kaya niya siyang maalala in a certain sense. EPA is the answer. Eicosapentaenoic. And the other one na mahaba yung word is DHA. It's long enough to be abbreviated. And I told this, I believe, that these are the two popularly called omega-3 fatty acids, which is sometimes really highlighted in some food products. So it's something that is plastered on packaging of like canned food, fish, and therefore, baka hindi nyo alam, maybe you're not remembering the specific terms or the technical terms, but in radio or TV commercials, they even throw these abbreviations sometimes. Maybe that's just me also remembering the commercials when I was younger and I am significantly older than you guys, so I don't know. But for sure, these other fatty acids are not omega-3. Linoleic is omega-6, arachidonic is 6, and oleic is omega-9. And just not to, forget the fact I already mentioned earlier si linolenic. Si linolenic is actually another omega-3, which is anyway not in the choices. Which of the following has the CPPP ring? It's just like a fancy way, diba, or a more obscure or hidden way of saying that I have the steroid nucleus. Okay, so that would definitely be the steroids, right? This 6 5 tetracyclic ring system that is arranged in quite a unique or weird way. Probably, again, weird siya when you see it for the first time or the first few times. But knowing how frequent the steroidal structure comes up in other pharmacy courses, like pharmacology, like probably like alkaloids and not really alkaloids, but even glycosides and PICOG, and even drugs in medchem, eventually dapat masanay na kayo. I don't know. Of course, me discussing this as an answer key means that this is not the first time you saw this, but I hope you're already slowly getting to a point that instead of finding this a unique structure, it's now becoming something familiar to you. And in my opinion, you should be graduating or entering near like the board exam seasons in the months to come, being more familiar with this appearance rather than weirded out, because it's very popular in our field. Okay? 16. Which storage lipids in plants and animals utilize a monohydroxy or monohydric alcohol? A long monohydric alcohol. I think this is like a keyword. Once you hear that in the topic lipids, there's no doubt. Okay, there is not a lot of things you should overthink and go straight ka dapat sa waxes. Because if you think about it, triglycerides and most sphingolipids utilize naman glycerol as their alcohol, and glycerol is trihydric, right? It has 3 OHs, and the mere fact that it has 3 OHs, that's what we capitalized on to make a triacyl glycerol, right? Yung sphingolipids, actually, they do also use a monohydric alcohol, which is called sphingosine. But I am very sure that I don't think there's any book or review questionnaire or whatsoever that will ever refer to sphingosine as merely a monohydric or monohydroxy alcohol. They will call sphingosine sphingosine because may specific double bond yan somewhere in its structure, may specific amino group yan somewhere in its structure, and I think just to clarify it, people will just call it sphingosine. So this one is for these two. This one is for obviously this one. And monohydric is for waxes. Okay? Which is not a use of cholesterol. Of course, this is in fact the most universal purpose of cholesterol, to determine how hard or soft the cell membrane will be. Then storage of energy. This is not a use of cholesterol. The only thing that we use as storage is tags, diba, or triglycerides. So this got to be the answer. And to say that cholesterol is the precursor of steroid hormones is already obvious, especially when I said that earlier, diba, like the sex hormones, sterones, testosterone, progesterone, and vitamin D, which is called calciferol. Another question that we answered earlier is a product of the opening of cholesterol with the power of sunlight. So, definitely uses of cholesterol yan. I think actually nakalista naman to sa handout ko somewhere, diba? What cholesterol can offer to us in a beneficial way. 18, which icosanoid? Platelets. So that has to be platelet, blood clot, thrombus, you know the words. So we got here thromboxane. Yung prostaglandins, actually, if you study them a little more in detail in your pharmacology, on top of their most popular, I guess, na function, which is inflammation, a negative function, I guess, may iba pang yung roles, right? And I will not elaborate too much on that here. Yung leukotrienes naman, it's more of asthma, and not really asthma per se, but lung-related. Specifically, bronchoconstriction whenever the body finds it necessary. So, ayun. And even the enzymes that produce that are important because target sila ng ibang gamot. Like thromboxane and prostaglandins or COX catalyze the synthesis of them, I mean. And of course, usually ang inhibitors ng mga COX ay mga NSAIDs. Whereas ito naman is LOX, and though I think the drug inhibiting this is way less popular, it's very commonly mentioned in pharmacology textbooks, which is Zilioton. Yung enzyme, maybe some of you are predicting or thinking of something like Montelukast. Receptor na ang target nun. Okay? But I will not elaborate too much on the difference here in this recording. No? Focus lang ako sa biochem aspect muna. The Lieberman-Berger test, again, you encountered qualitative tests ng quiz 1, so I hope you already expected the same sa quiz 2. I put here the most popular test for lipids to kind of give you an advantage already. Right? Cholesterol yan. For glycerol, we have the acrolein test, yung sinusunog siya, and amoy burnt fat ang odor niya. Fats is somewhat related also to the acrolein test because when you say fat, that's triglyceride. And when you say triglyceride, parang sinabi mo na rin glycerol. For purines, tumawid pa tayo, like we went to another biomolecule. But in fairness, I believe that for purines, as in yung purines ng DNA and RNA, as well as yung purines ng mga ibang natural products like in PICOG, mga alkaloids, why not also know the Murexide test? Or at least marinig mo yung word, like when you hear that test, purines agad yan. Caffeine, xanthine, probably guanine, adenine. Oh, I just said this. Acrolein is a test for glycerol. Yung phosphate, ano yan eh? That's ammonium molybdate, which is another, at least as a reviewee, when I was reviewing as a board exam taker, I automatically think phosphate and the color yellow sa reagent na yan. Yung fatty acids, there are a lot of outdated tests in my table. I think like the osmic acid, if I remember. Tas ito, again, Lieberman. So those are the questions for lipids. And next, let's have the nucleic acid questions naman. Starting off with the question related to the building block, a nucleoside is made up of what? And the answer to this is letter A. Kasi It's nucleoside. Actually, this is not the real building block, or well, at least the complete building block of a nucleic acid. Kasi dapat ang salita ay nucleo. Huh, is that big enough? But nucleotide, diba? Letter T, where you don't have just these two, but on top of that, you have a phosphate. Okay, so be careful with the spelling of the words, because again, there are some words in, well, actually not just in biochem, but in pretty much all other subjects that sound similar, very, very similar. Ito nga just one letter difference, but they slightly mean different things. Okay, this base is definitely first a purine. That should be, I don't know, that should be the first thing coming from your head. Uy, dalawang ring, right? I have a bicyclic ring, so that's a purine, and that's either guanine or adenine. And based on the thing on top, that has to be adenine. Whereas, ito namang dalawa, yan ang ating pure or picot, where you only have a single ring, si cytosine, thymine, and uracil. So cytosine has the nitrogen on top. These two have an oxygen on top, pero yung thymine merong methyl. And I don't know, probably I asked here, diba, a question related to, I mean, a purine in this question, but of course, you should expect that anytime I could, on another exam, ask naman any of the three pyrimidines, so you gotta be ready. The same way that I ask you to be ready for, let's say, an amino acid. Actually, when I think about it, parang no quiz 1 pala, no, I never showed you a structure mismo of something like asparagine or alanine. But I could totally do that. Okay? Or kanina sa fatty acids, I just asked the words like arachidic or palmitic, but no one's stopping me. Diba? You cannot stop me from, now I'm having ideas in your exam questions. You can't stop me if I suddenly ask you this one, and then depending on how many carbons ito, it could be any of those amino acids I asked you to memorize. So, ayun. Anyway, the answer is adenine. 23. On what carbon number of the sugar is the base? And again, when we say base, that's the nitrogenous base, the purine or pyrimidine. So for example, ito yung ating base. You must attach that to yung part na yan ng sugar natin, diba? And what carbon is this of the Haworth? Well, usually it's ribose, so this gotta be 1 prime. So this is the answer. In contrast naman, if 1 prime handles the base, then 1, 2, 3, 4. Yung 5 prime, this carbon is the one that handles the phosphate. Okay? And I think I have a question related to the name of the bonds. So just to elaborate that, the name of the bond here is the N-glycosidic bond, right? The bond between this one is a phosphoester bond. And if ever, only if you have a second phosphate or a third, the bond between two phosphates is a phosphoanhydride. This is for a single nucleotide, right? But the moment, for example, you go to two nucleotides coming together, then the name of the bond naman that connects two nucleotides is a phosphodiester bond, which I also believe I mentioned all of those words or terms before. Okay? What is, yeah, I just said that. Pag two nucleotides, phosphodiester. And then I labeled all of those in the previous page. Okay? Right? Anyway, let's go to 25. Which of the following is not a characteristic of RNA strands? So, are they often single strands? Yes. And DNA and double, like DNA double, right? And then, of course, they use the sugar ribose. Come on. RNA, ribonucleic acid. This one does require you to go a little forward into the central dogma, but this is also correct, diba? Transcription creates the RNA. If you want to make the DNA, then you call that replication. Pag yung protein naman, translation na. So this gotta be the wrong statement kasi RNA does not have thymine. Uracil instead ang meron siya. The only type of nucleic acid that normally has thymine, T, is DNA. And 26 is asking us for a complementary DNA sequence. So that means here, A is to T and C is to G, according to the idea of base pairing. So this is C, T, A, G, T, T. So it's C, T, A, G, T, T. Kung ang tanong ay ginawang RNA, if the question was made into RNA, then instead of being T, A will become U. So for example, G will still become C, but now, sabi ko nga, A will become U. A, yung TA pa rin, kasi A was still in the menu, diba? We still have adenine in RNA. G, and then AA, dapat TT, no, T anymore in RNA. So, this one, ito yun, diba? This one would have been the answer if the question was asking us for a RNA version or RNA product, a copied RNA transcript sometimes that we call. Okay? 27. In unmutated DNA sample, how much guanine is present if there's 19% adenine? If A is equal to T and C is equal to G, I have here 19 adenine, then equal yung thymine. Add that, 38, and then subtract that from 100, that would be 62. Divide that by 2, then that means tig 31, and we are looking for guanine, then I have 31% guanine. I know you noticed how I sped up my discussion to like times 3, right? Pero kasi diba, I mentioned all of that already before. The idea of base pairing, that means that equal tong dalawa, and just do some mathematical computations. All knowing that when you add all of them, dapat 100 ang percent nilang apat. Okay? Kasi sila lang naman yung 4 na basis ng DNA. Actually, may shortcut pang isa. You want to become a little faster? Then always assume that purines will always be a total of 50 and pyrimidines will always be equal to 50. So kung adenine ay 19%, tapos ang tinatanong is guanine, di ba that's the other purine, the 50 minus 19 is equal to 31, which is basically the same answer, right? Purga. So if 19 ang adenine ko, the remaining part of 50 is si G. Which of the following are properties of the double helix? It does base pair, that's the entire idea of what we've been computing. Either right or left-handed, which by the way, when we say right-handed, that means clockwise ang spin. Pag left-handed, counterclockwise. So actually, masasagot na natin yung 29. Clockwise ang tanong, so that would be right-handed. So, correcto. But it's not parallel. Dapat, the word is anti-parallel. The fact that if one strand of my double helix is from 5' to 3', yung kabila goes in the opposite direction. So, only 2 of the choices are correct. Okay? Next. 30. Left-handed, the only one is ZDNA. Ito actually tuloy ang di ko maalala if I did put this in our notes. But if ever, this is the first time I mentioned it, that do know that from now on, this one is the only left-handed. The other 2 types of DNA are right-handed. Another common thing that's being asked also is what type of DNA is the most common, and that will be the bDNA. No, maging default DNA. When you say of DNA and you don't specify anong type, just assume that 99% of the time, it's the bDNA form. Oh, central dogma. In replication, I just said that earlier, you wanna make more DNA copies. More, meaning you start from DNA, you end with DNA. Dapat, if I wanna make RNA from DNA, that's the transcription word. Or if you make protein from RNA, then yan yung tinatawag natin na translation. As you should know, hindi pwedeng mag-jump. You cannot jump from DNA to protein. That violates the central dogma. Okay? And DNA is produced from RNA. Actually, this is somewhat possible, although yung letter A statement is the inverse of letter B. So, para siyang baliktad ng transcription. That's why this special, process is called reverse transcription. I also don't know if I was able to even touch on this word when we had our lecture on day, kailan ko to diniscuss? Day 2? Yeah, day 2. But examples of viruses, they're not even living things. Viruses are non-living, but there are viruses that can perform reverse transcription. The most popular is the human immunodeficiency virus. Kaya nga, di ba, when you hear of the word antiretrovirals, retro as in reverse transcription, you hear of anti-HIV drugs. Hepa B is also a popular example which has reverse transcriptase. So it's actually clear in most antiviral chapters of pharmacology books that when you have reverse transcriptase inhibitors, those target either HIV or Hepa B. 32, RNA polymerase. Like, the word is already giving you a very, hindi nga subtle, it's very strong, it's an obvious hint. This guy wants to make RNA. Ano bang tawag sa process ng RNA synthesis? Transcription, right? So that would be letter A. Translation, DNA ginagawa sa translation. They dapat something like, pati ako minsan mali sa like ito protein synthesis, diba? So it will be something that creates proteins for some reason, but this word does not specify that. Or kunwari, pag replication, you want to make DNA. So dapat, ang word na ginagamit is DNA polymerase, which actually is a legitimate enzyme name. Nakita nyo dapat yan when you study the process of replication. And speaking of replication, 33 does ask about that. These are discontinuous stretches in which the lagging strand is initially synthesized. So kumbaga, this is my first strand na lagging, and then this is the discontinuous stretch that you still need to attach to the initial strand using ligase. And we are talking about Okazaki fragments. Tapos kapag gumana na yung ligase, then mabubuo na siya, right? And then you add another Okazaki fragment, and then you join it to the previous strand by another action of ligase. So, ganun gumagana ang lagging strand. And the fact that it always pauses in the middle, diba? It stops every once in a while, paputol-putol, patigil-tigil. That's why it is lagging behind. Which of the, by the way, introns are, as opposed to exons, the non-coding things later that we need to splice out after RNA synthesis. Promoters are those regions that promote RNA synthesis. And primers are small strands that are, they're not even strands, they're small fragments that start the process of DNA synthesis na tinutuloy naman DNA polymerase. I'm mentioning these words very casually and randomly because the expectation is you have those in our discussion or even in the handouts if you're getting lost somewhere, diba? Hanap-hanapin nyo lang. They are supposed to be there. Like for example, the problem sometimes when we make DNA is that there's this supercoiling that once you create your replication bubble, the part right here where helicase is has a very high amount of pressure or tension, which could break the DNA. That's called supercoiling. So to prevent supercoiling and avoid the danger of DNA falling apart, you need enzymes called topoisomerases to stabilize that area. Okay? Helicase is the one which actually makes the replication bubble in the first place. Polymerase is the one that carries over from the primer. And ligase, I already told you how it operates on the Okazaki fragments earlier. 35. The strand that is not used for RNA synthesis is definitely not the template, so this is a correct word. But you should know, I believe it's in our handout, that the equally popular or even probably more popular name for the non-template strand is the sense. So that would be A or C. Yung antisense is actually the more technical name for the template or the one we are copying in the process of transcription or RNA synthesis. And once we have already created that, we are going to supposed to find introns and exons, where if you want to retain the exons and remove the introns, remember the introns are not the important ones, you need to perform splicing. I'm actually saying that because that's question number 37. So that is splicing. We do need to mention 36. In preparation pa lang, nag-ready ka pa lang. You are not yet you have not yet created the RNA strand, gagawin mo pa lang, and you want to let that or allow that to happen, promote that to happen. So we call those promoters. Okay. I think I didn't have the time anymore to elaborate or to give specific names, or maybe I could, you know what, ba't pa ako nagpapanghirap mag-assume? Let me open the handout first that we have in my other device. Let me see if I actually put like specific names of the promoters. As it seems, walang nalagay. So I think I could introduce a little bit of these terms. The most common name for the promoter pag prokaryote is the Pribnol box, although you should know that that's one of the many popular promoters. And then for eukaryotes, we have the Harkness box. Okay? Meron talagang equivalent na letters yan, but I don't think you need to memorize the bases like TATA, mga ganun. 38, small unit for eukaryotes. Wow. Okay, so remember, diba, pag prokaryote or eukaryote, depende rin yun kung anong, mag-iiba rin yung number ng subunit natin. So, large, small, large, small. Pag prokaryote, the entire thing is 70. The entire thing pag eukaryote is 80s. That's 50-30 pag prokaryote, 60-40 pag eukaryote. So, small subunit, I'm looking down, for eukaryotes, so that would be 40. Ito ang large pag eukaryote, so 60. The large for prokaryote is 50. The small for prokaryotes is 30. And then, I don't know if I said this in class, but you do not add them to get 70. Hindi yun 60 plus 40 is 80. You need to memorize those numbers. How convenient, however, that always when you jump from prokaryote to eukaryote, all you do is add 10. 50 plus 10 is 60. 30 plus 10 is 40. 70 plus 10 is 80. So I don't know. That's my way of memorizing, simply because I know how to add 10 and I feel confident with adding 10. Pero you do you. Okay? Or subtracting 10 if you want to go backward from eukaryote to prokaryote. Speaking of translation, since diba, ribosome is the site for translation or protein synthesis, you do need to know the start codon. And I am very sure I have emphasized that to you. You have 64 codons total, only one is the start, and that is the OG. Whereas, yung mga stop naman, tatlo, which are WAG, UGA, and UAA. May shall I share a trivia? Also, diba, out of the many amino acids, most of them have multiple codons. Na kunwari, one amino acid have 4 codons, na iba-iba letters, pero siya pa rin yun. But there are 2 amino acids that they only have a single codon. And that would be methionine, because the one and only codon for methionine is coincidentally the start codon also, AUG. And UGG is the one and only codon for tryptophan. Every other, the remaining 18 amino acids na standard have multiple, at least 2 codons for them. Actually, the word for that, the fact that one amino acid can have many codons, is the rule of redundancy or degeneracy. However, I think we didn't have any more the time to elaborate on those rules or facts about the genetic code, which I think sa review na lang namin kino-cover because of the lack of time. Mutations, I have mentioned just very briefly, and the one where we have a stop codon, we end with nothing. Wala na kasi nag-stop na, so that's nonsense. Pag may sense, you don't stop, you don't get a stop codon, but you get a different amino acid. But silent, nothing happens, right? That's why it's kind of called silent. There wasn't really any impact at the end. So, those are questions for the nucleic acids and the central dogma. Bitin na bitin nga actually sa central dogma dito. I thought I could ask like 5 questions more at least para ma-flesh out lang yung tatlong process ng central dogma. But I was like, sige, okay na yan, because we didn't really have a lot of time to expound on those three processes. Though, in reality, matagal talaga i-discuss yan in a full lecture. Anyway, okay. I'll breathe in real time and I'll pause and then balik ako sa metabolism. But in your case, as you watch right now, if you continue going, we now go to metabolism. Right. Let's go to the questions on metabolism. And I don't know, I tried to really focus more on the fundamentals and not too much on the individual pathways. Kasi hindi naman natin masyado talagang kinover yung individual pathways, right? We didn't really have a lot of time. So, ano ganito lang. Often produces energy. It's just a general question. Diba? Though, okay, you still, I mean, pag ganito mga tanong, you can be victim to feeling that it's too easy and then yung pala baliktad yung sagot mo. It's catabolic. Kasi if you have large things, diba? You have large things, you break it down, so katab yan, diba? You break it down into smaller things. Usually, yung mga nakatago na bagay inside this larger material, that's energy, and you are now releasing more of that energy for the body or the cell or whatever organism it is to use them. Pero, going the other way around, if magiging anabolism yung gagawin mo, that means you need to use energy or absorb it from somewhere else to build these small things back into a large thing. So, pag anabolic, this one does more often than not consume or use up energy. Baliktad naman siya. Gluconeogenesis, from the word genesis, is creation. Creation is synthesis. You make things, you build them up. So that's anabolic, right? Whereas catabolic, usually, yan yung mga lysis. Because to lyse is to break, and catabolic is breaking down. So, breaking down of glycogen, just combine those. Pag ganyan, di ba, pwede nga magpanggap ka. Just pretend you don't see those words yet. You're like, okay, glycogen. Tapos, breakdown is lysis. I will say a disclaimer, this doesn't work all the time, of course, but in this case, it does. So the word we're looking for is glycogen lysis or glycogenolysis. Ito isa pa. I just said it doesn't work all the time. So ang side comment ko dyan, how about creation of glycogen? So glycogen, and then creation is genesis, diba? Unfortunately, the word is not like glycogenogenesis, because I think scientists were like, but dalawang twice lalabas yung word na gen. Okay? So, instead of glycogenogenesis, they just merged them together. And naging pangalan tuloy is glycogenesis. Okay? But here, glycolysis is breakdown of glyco, which is generally sugar, or gluconeogenesis is creation of new sugar or just creation of glucose. Right? Synthesis of glucose, I just said, is gluconeogenesis. I would like to elaborate though on this. Neo, in the sense that tayo kasing mga humans or animals, we cannot really synthesize glucose from scratch, diba? So in a way, gluconeogenesis is not really creating it from nowhere. We're kind of recycling whatever materials we have in our body. And we are just reusing it, diba? Or converting it into glucose. If you want to create glucose from starch, like glucogenesis, as in yung organism na yun yung may karapatan or right to say that it created that from scratch, it would be plants. Because you now call the process of creating sugar from scratch as photosynthesis. Ano lang, wala lang, side comment lang. I'm saying this because photosynthesis is sometimes asked naman in pharmacognosy, both in PICOG as a course sa undergrad and as a part of the board exam under Module 2, which, by the way, Biochem and PICOG do fall under the same module, Module 2, right? ATP equivalent of FAD-H, I mean, it's FAD-H or FAD-H2. It's kind of the same thing, actually. So that would be 1.5. Pag 2.5, it's NADH. I remember when this question was copy-pasted by me. Ang tanong nga is, what's the ATP equivalent of FAD H? Walang H doon. And I put H there para wala na mag-overthink. Because, kunwari, I'm the student, I'll be answering the question that I made here, tas wala yung H. What do you think I would answer if I read this like this at walang letter H? Actually, I could go overthinking mode, mamiloso po ako, and I would answer 0. Kasi the only time that you can get energy from FAD and NAD is if they are in the reduced form, FAD H and NAD H. And when they do become FAD or NAD, these two things will not give us any energy unless ibalik mo sila sa H na yun. So in my mind, I rather not let you guys suffer from the idea of overthinking and just put H para clear, FAD H 1.5. Okay? What enzymes facilitate production of it? I shouldn't have erased that thing earlier. Can I yeah. So, di ba, I was able to convert FAD H, baliktad pala dapat. So, production of reduced factors. So, dapat yung arrow natin, ano ba pwede kong gawin dito? Yung arrow natin is something like backward, FAD to FAD H, and NAD to NAD H. And I said here, reduce factors, kasi nga, when you have a hydrogen, addition of H is reduction. If you want to reduce something, it takes two to tango, diba? In the sense na, if someone is reduced, like this guy, then someone else, whatever he or she is, must be converted naman into something else by oxidation. And what enzyme facilitates oxidation? Dehydrogenases. And that's the answer to the question. So for example, you go to your handout, sige, maghanap ka ng dehydrogenase. I won't make it hard for us. For example, Krebs. There are 4 dehydrogenases there, diba? And I mentioned that also when I was telling you an overview of the Krebs cycle. Na, automatically, it's dehydrogenase, which is the name of the enzyme whenever you create either a NADH or a FADH. Because kaakibat, kasabay, alongside the oxidation of someone like yung, I don't know, isocitrate to alpha ketoglutarate, or for example, ano ba, fumarate to malate. Kasama nun, yung pag-reduce nung mga to. Okay? So, ayan. Next, 47. What is produced from pyruvate? What is produced? Wait lang ah. I'm just trying to look for something in my notes. Okay. I kind of commented earlier fumarate to malate. Wala pala oxidation yun. No? Yung malate pala to oxaloacetate yung merong dehydrogenase. But anyway, that's beside the point. Let's go to 47. What is produced from pyruvate under aerobic automatic acetyl yan? Kasi pag human tapos anaerobic, lactate naman. Yung ethanol, humans don't create ethanol, right? It's other organisms like some microbes and yeast. Okay? Na anaerobic din. Rate limiting of glycolytic or glycolysis is PFK. And then, I'm double checking first. Baka, mamaya di pala totoo sinasabi ko. G6PD, yes, it's in my handout under PPP. Isocitrate dehydrogenase is indicated sa Krebs. HMG-CoA reductase is indicated sa mevalonate. Yeah. And acetyl-CoA carboxylase is for fatty acid synthesis. All of them are in my handout. So again, PPP, Krebs or TCA cycle or citric acid cycle, mevalonate, tapos fatty acid synthesis, and more, right? There are more rate-limiting enzymes that are really bold highlighted pa in my handouts. So kung mahilig ka mag-highlight ng PDF, you should have highlighted all of these words. Ang tanong lang is if you can recall them, right? And pag ganyan, I would say flashcards is the way to go, right? So, Quizlet if you're more into old school or like other apps lately, like Anki, ganon. Complex 3 is dapat reductase, but it should be cytochrome reductase. Itong succinate, basta may succinate is complex 2, oxidase is 4, I mean, that's why some people just, ang palatandaan nila, complex 3 ductase, or 4, like O oxidase, no, 4 oxidase. I don't know, they're really pushing the issue sometimes. Whenever you see NADH, that's already complex 1. Okay? ATP synthase is 5. This is not actually a part of the real ETC na nga, diba? It's already after the electron transport chain, but it's part of the entire process of creating ATP in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Sometimes even that, I think I said that in class 2, that in the board exams, it was asked sometimes where the pathway happens, like Krebs happens in the matrix. So please study that, remember that. Or inga, the electron transport chain is in the membrane of the mitochondrion, blah, blah, blah. Aerobic is 32. Dapat, pag anaerobic na, 2 na, and nakatali yan in my table, right? In the handout, in like page, ano yan? I'm trying to find it in my notes. In page, ano to? 13? It's happening to my Adobe. Basta page, somewhere, di ba, sa metab. You can't really get 0 as in 0. There has to be at least a little ATP. Yung 10, nagagamit lang yan if you get for every acetyl-CoA that goes to the Krebs cycle. Yan yung tinatali pa sa Krebs, di ba? So if you go to the table, yung computation, di ba? For every TCA cycle, you have 7.5 coming from the 3 NADHs, 1.5 from the 1 FADH, and 1 from the 1 GTP. So that's 10 ATP for every acetyl going through a complete Krebs cycle. Beta-hydroxybutyrate is one of the ketone bodies alongside acetone and acetoacetate, diba? Come on. Itong mga iba, we have the different saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. I started the recording with that. Amino acids we've discussed before. Yung keto acid is what happens to an amino acid after the process of transamination, right? Okay. L-carnitine is used for the preparation of breaking down of fatty acids, which are part of fats. Actually, the specific name of the pathway which we break down the fatty acids from fats is beta oxidation, right? Or fatty acid oxidation. Extracting from dietary sources, so hindi mo siya ginawa from scratch, is just recycling them or salvaging them. Okay? And I remember really this idea that only in the Philippines does the word salvage have a negative indication. If you know a little bit of your Philippine history, you know why that is and during what time frame and who was responsible for that. But salvage is really a positive word from the root word salvation, saving. Kasi nga, you are recycling whatever you're supposed to already throw away. And we're talking here usually about the purines and pyrimidines from the meat that we eat. Product of the mevalonate, di ba sabi ko kanina, mevalonate pathways, rate-limiting enzyme is HMG co-reductase, and that leads us all the way to the creation of steroids, di ba? Or sterols, so that is P. Yung ketone bodies naman, that's the main process of ketogenesis. Okay, that's obvious. Pyruvate is the product of glycolysis. And then ribose phosphate, a pentose with phosphate, is the main product of PPP. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine. I hope, guys, you are banking on the idea na alam niyo yung abbreviation ng serotonin. Tryptamine, edi tryptophan. But also, guys, remember, there is a table on, anong page yun? The second to the last page? Yeah, second to the last page of the handout, yung mga pwede mo rin magawa sa ibang amino acids like histamine or heme, or even like, I don't know, like the catecholamines, right? Pyruvate is a metabolite from, I just said, glycolysis. And glycolysis is the breakdown of what? Of sugars. Glyco is sugar. So this one is letter A. Okay? Ganun lang sagutin yung 56. So I don't know if some of you overthought, kaya may sinagot pa kayong iba, but come on. Okay, there are other questions wherein there's a proper time to think very deeply and, connect the dots, but this question is definitely not one of those. This is as simple as it gets. So dapat, the straightforward yung sagot nyo dito. Okay, just like this one. You see that the suffix is osin, like adenosine and guanosine. Nag-practice pa nga tayo ng konti nung naming yan, di ba? So, that should be a purine. Yung mga pyrimidine naman, like cytidine, thymidine, orotidine, yung nag-end sa idine. So, yung mga pyrimidines, I mean. I just said earlier, sometimes board exams do ask the site, and glycolysis happens at the cytosol. Yung nucleus, usually mga central dogma lang naman yung nangyayari dyan. Particularly DNA and RNA synthesis, or based on my discussion earlier, yung replication and transcription na tinatawag. Matrix, a lot of respiration or things that produce energy, which justifies this being called the powerhouse of the cell. So that would be the Krebs, or for example, the beta oxidation that also produces a lot of ATP. Yung mitochondrial membrane, of course, the electron transport chain is arguably the only popular pathway that happens in the, to be specific, inner, hindi outer, inner mitochondrial membrane. The site, I just said that would be the matrix. Okay. Oh, by the way, yung cytosol naman is usually most pathways naman for carbohydrates. So I don't think it's indicated in my handout, but PPP, cytosol din yan. All of glycogen, glycogenesis, and glycogenolysis also happen in the cytosol, as well as fatty acid synthesis, which I think naman, and let me just confirm in my handout. Did I put it there? Yeah, hindi. Ay, wait. Yeah, I put it there. Yung fatty acids created in the cytosol, but when you break them down, beta oxidation na sa matrix, talagang nakasegregate yan, nakahiwalay. And then the urea, remember urea comes initially from ammonia, which comes from our glutamate, which comes from amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of what? Proteins. So, proteins, ang final product nila ay urea. And again, remember may salad yan. Do not interchange proteins from purines kasi ang waste product naman ng purine is uric acid, or in the ionized form, urate. Urea, urate. Come on, ingat. Okay, be very careful. Another common waste product is kapag naman sa heme in our blood, although I hope you already know this also, bilirubin naman. I think these three are the most popular when it comes to, waste products. No, so I hope you remember them and you do not interchange them. Anyway, that's as far as we go to the discussion of our test 2, and prepare naman for the next test, which will cover naman medicinal chemistry.